listening to the Barcode Podcast with your host, Chris Glandon, serving cybersecurity straight up with no chaser. Let's hit the bar and grab a drink.
Hey, Chris, what's going on, man?
Yo, Tony. Do you realize I've been coming here for a year now? Time flies.
No shit. For real?
Yeah, man. The only cybersecurity bar in existence. And you're a pretty decent bartender, too, to be honest. Your suggestions are always on point, and you always serve top quality cocktails.
Well, for that, sir, I thank you. Speaking of that, what's on your mind tonight, dude? What you feeling, bro?
I'm so tired, bro. You know, I've been working late nights, just trying to make a name for myself. I'll tell you what, man, success does not come easy.
Yo, you need to invest in some sleep, straight up. That's the secret to my success. All I do is win, 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 no matter what. Until you're able to catch some Z's, let me suggest a drink that will have you alert, ready to attack the day, and straight up tear through the competition. We call it the Electric Shark. In a shaker filled with ice, combine 1 ounce spiced rum, 2 ounces blue curacao, and 4 ounces pineapple juice. Shake it. Strain over a glass with ice. Top it off with some ginger beer.
Damn, that's what I call a shock to the system.
You know it. Keep chasing those dreams, brother. So, it's been real. It's been fun. It's been real fun. I'll see you next round.
I'm here with Will Lin, Managing Director and Co-founder of ForgePoint Capital, a cybersecurity-focused VC firm with $770 million worth of assets under management. He is currently on the boards of Ativo Networks, Bishop Fox, Concourse Labs, Login Radius, Remediant, Sphere, Symmetry Systems, and Upticks. Will, thanks for joining me today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
And I'm also here with no stranger to Barcode, my special co-host for this episode, Gabe Doncel. Buenos dias, my friend.
Hey, good afternoon, evening, whatever.
So, Will, you and I met recently at Black Hat 2021. First off, I assume that you've been to Black Hat pre-pandemic. You know, what are your thoughts on this year's event, how it compared in your perspective to previous events, and then if you had any, notable takeaways for you personally?
Yeah. Chris, you got to see me in the events / party aspect of Black Hat. And I would say the nice thing is that because we're so active at Black Hat and do a lot and invite a lot of people to a lot of things, I was actually able to compare and contrast what percentage of people usually show up pre-pandemic and how many people actually showed up this pandemic or this time around. And I would say right now my numbers are around about 50% of CISOs came or practitioners came. About 50% of the VCs came that normally come to Black Hat, and only 20% of the vendors came compared to normal. So this is a year where there was actually more, at least from my experience, more practitioners than vendors this year.
Yeah, I walked that vendor floor in about 40 minutes. Whereas normally, if I stop and talk to vendors, I could be there all day. It was really, really light. But at the same time, I felt like there was more one-on-one interaction, and there was a benefit there to be able to, talk to vendors, see what they're really about, go to the arsenal, see what different tool sets exist. So I think there was a benefit there.
I'd agree. It's this year is supposed to be our opportunity to, experience Black Hat like the good old days. And it probably is pretty true. I mean, the good old days probably had fewer vendors than they do recently. And so overall, I thought it was great. I really enjoyed going. And luckily, no COVID. Confirmed negative tests.
Nice. You heard it here first. Let's just rewind for a moment. And I want to talk to you a little bit about your background. I didn't get to talk to you too much about it when we met, and curious, what sort of environment you grew up with in terms of security and technology, and how did you evolve to get to where you are today?
Yeah, of course. On my end, in some ways, I don't feel very unique because I think like for a lot of us, our exposure to technology was via video games. I mean, I'm no exception. Freaking video games. But over time, what I realized is, I want to play video games at home, and I need a computer to do that, and I couldn't afford one, and so that encouraged me to learn how to build computers. And then after I learned how to build one, I encouraged me to realize, wow, this is a special skill. Like, people really appreciate this, especially when I was pre-high school. And so I decided to build a business, selling and supporting computers. And in college was entrepreneurial. And so I think that entrepreneurial experience really shaped me and sort of drove me over time to become a venture capitalist.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you were more technology minded or more business minded, but it sounds like you really started out as technology being your passion, but then it evolved into the business side.
Yeah. And, it was crazy. When I went to college, I had friends who were engineers, and I always felt like I was more technical than them. Like, I was out there helping them. I have a distinct experience. One of my best friends, he was best man at my wedding. He's like this rock star engineer. And near finals, he accidentally spilled some water on his computer and had a puff of smoke. And he was like freaking out because he needed to prepare for his finals. And I was there like fixing his computer for him. And it was like, wait, you're the engineer. You're the rock star.
Oh yeah.
And so it was funny. I think my technical experience was more street versus educational. And that street experience, I think, helped me get into security as well.
Very cool. So I know you mentioned the transition from tech to business, although I'm curious, when did you start to get into the investment side?
Yeah. So right out of college, it was a recession and things weren't doing well. So I wanted a high paying job, went into investment banking, probably one of the highest at that time. And, I didn't really know what I wanted. All I knew is I needed a job. But then the nice thing is I got lucky because a natural path for investment banking was into venture capital, into hedge funds, to private equity. And so I got very fortunate there that I was able to move into venture capital afterwards. I would say that when I did it, it was not very popular. Everyone wanted to go into other roles, private equity and hedge funds. Out of my class, let's say there were 100 investment bankers my age that went into the various roles then. I was probably only one of 4 or 5 that did it my year. Now, every single year, there's probably like 20, 30, 40, 50 VCs joining the industry at any point in time. So I guess the big reason why I knew I wanted to do venture, even though it was much less paying, I actually took a pay cut to go from investment banking to venture capital. I took a pay, if I did hedge funds or private equity, I would be making significantly more than venture capital at that point in time. But I just knew I wanted to do it primarily because of my entrepreneurial experience beforehand. I mean, you get this feeling of creating something out of nothing. And it's just so rewarding. Like, you just want to keep learning more and more and more on how to keep doing that. And it's a little bit like, this is how I imagine people who love gardening feel, right? Like, you plant a seed and all of a sudden, holy crap, there's a plant there. And then eventually you get fruit and you're like, what the hell? How the heck? It feels like you created something out of nothing. And that is a little bit how I feel about investing as well. And so, for me, it was very natural. I wanted to invest in companies that venture startups, right? Private equity, what you're doing there is, in some cases, you're optimizing the business, right? And on the financial aspect. And with hedge funds, you're investing in businesses that are already out there. You're sort of just like betting on them to continue to grow, continue to do better. But in venture, it's a little bit more like gardening. This company did not exist, only a very short amount of time before. And as it grows and gets bigger and bigger, you sort of see that, how you're changing people's lives, both the employees that are joining the company, but also the customers that previously did not have access to this solution because it just didn't exist.
So one aspect I found confusing is the difference between Series A, B, and C funding. At a high level, would you mind explaining the differentiators there?
Yeah, for sure. The easiest way is to look at how many people are involved in the company. Because, you can't have employees if you don't have revenues or funding. And so you can only grow to a certain number of people without a certain amount of revenue or the certain amount of funding. And so, to simplify it a ton. It's not exactly like this, but I'll just do it anyway. It's sort of like 10 people, 100 people, a couple hundred people, thousands of people, right? And so Series A, it's closer to 10 people. Series B, closer to 100 people. Series C, closer to a couple hundred. Series D and pre-IPO, all that stuff, that's when it gets to multiple hundred / multiple thousand. And so that's not perfect, but it's a nice rule of thumb to sort of give you a sense of how big each company is when you hear about what stage of fundraising that they've done.
So that's interesting. Now, when you talk about different types of investors involved, angel versus seed, for example, how are they typically aligned?
Yeah. And so angels, and this is all traditional definitions, things change all the time. But angel is more like, 0 people, right? Like 2, maybe 3, maybe one person has an idea.
So just an idea, right? Yeah.
It's an idea, and they might already have another job. They might still have a day job, and they're just like, hey, I'm an angel investor. I'm willing to, to back you, to convince you to maybe make this a full-time thing. And then seed is pretty close right after angel, which is sort of like, maybe 2 to 3 people are full-time focused on it.
Okay.
And they have the idea and, some starting to talk to customers. Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
But if we keep using the metric of number of people, that's, I think, probably the easiest. That sort of gives you a sense.
So, we talk about angel investments, seed, series A, B, C, D. Is there a phase that you guys specialize in, or when you see an opportunity and it's the right time, the right space, you're going for it?
Yeah. On our end, we focus on Series A and B. So like 10 to 100 people type companies. And, the reason why we do that is pretty simple. Now that I think more about it, the physics of it all, we're managing $770 million. We have a team of 13. The team of 13 can only take on so many board seats at a time. And so when you think about this like Goldilocks situation, right? Like I want to take on as many boards as I can, but providing as much quality as I can. And then, the more I can provide more quality help, the earlier the company is as well. And so, but we can't do seed because the reason if we were to do seed, to deploy $770 million, that's like easily 100 companies. And so we would all be just like stretched so thin to try to help all those companies at the same time. Right now we're around 34, which 30 are total, 30 are active. And by the time we're done with the 770, we'll probably be around 35 active, 40 total, something like that. And so we have a lot of capacity to help our companies with 13 people and, 30 to 35 companies.
That's great.
Yeah. It's like, there are some firms that manage billions, like 5 billion, 10 billion. And in the end, they're pretty similar as well. They want only a certain number of companies. And so they're just very naturally later stage investors than us. Like they're very naturally the Series C, D, and E investors as well. And so at the end of the day, like everyone sort of has like a good fit in the ecosystem. Like there's the great equalizer is how much time we each have and how much effort we can spend per company. But then the next part is how much money do we have that we're deploying at the same time. And being a sector focused fund, like, joining these companies and helping them build a foundation from that 10 to 100 employees stage, it's very differentiating. It's a very rewarding place to jump in.
Sorry, I was on mute.
That's the most popular phrase of 2021, 2020, 2021.
Pretty much.
So my question is there a way to tell what type of startup will be successful right off the bat? Are there certain characteristics that you can see or that you can sense in, a 30-second elevator pitch that grabs your attention?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you get hit heavy with a lot, right? So you got to kind of just filter out the noise versus what is going to be a legitimate technology or business, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think over time we all sort of refine our gut reaction to companies, and in some cases, eventually we just start hearing these words or these ways of thinking or principles or something that's like, oh man, that reminds me of this other awesome experience or this other terrible experience, and I know to avoid it, that kind of thing. So there is value in experience over time, and eventually it turns into a bias that could be either positive or negative. I would say that in the first 30 seconds, if I only had 30 seconds to talk to someone, I'd want to know about that person. Like that's, if you only give me one choice, I would spend all 30 seconds on the team. Because what happens is, especially in the early stages, is that you're going to change. Change is inevitable. Like one day you might be doing cloud security, but then all of a sudden you're doing like identity, right? Like, because at that stage in time, you are like constantly testing the market and trying to figure out what the heck problem is out there for me to solve. Like you have an initial idea, you have expertise, you have a network, you have friends, but stuff is going to change. The way you message is going to change. The problem, the solution you build is going to change. There's so much change. And so finding a team that can deal with ups and downs, deal with that change, and turn that seed into a very, successful plant is, it requires a lot of, and I don't want to use the word expertise, but there's that je ne sais quoi kind of thing, right? To like a certain person, either they've done it before and they're just continuously compounding and building upon lessons learned, or they've never done it before, but there are a lot of applicable life lessons that they have that just apply really, really well to being an entrepreneur.
So you can really see the drive, the passion within the person and be able to judge a lot from how they come across versus before they even get into the tech.
Yeah. And it's so nuanced. Oh my gosh. Like, I don't even know how to describe the nuances, right? Like I'm trying to write a book about like venture capital, and it's tough because, these nuances are so hard to capture. But it's like, it's not just like, oh yeah, this person's really smart or really driven, that kind of thing. It's more, if I had to choose a word just right now, it's probably more of like a scrappy feeling, right? Like more of a, not like scrappy in a, shady kind of way, but scrappy in a like feedback loop kind of way. Like, okay. Oh, I learned this. Okay, I'm going to do that. Oh, gotcha. I learned that. Okay, I'm going to do that. Right? Like they're just constantly like absorbing their environment, and they're constantly like just moving forward,
adapting, right?
Adapting to it, yeah. Right? Evolving, right? And they almost need to like love that. They almost need to be like obsessed with that experience. Because, some people just like, oh, I want to go close customers and then generate revenue and all that stuff. And, I want revenue. I want a huge team. I want to hire people. Like all that's cool and great. But there are just certain things that differentiate someone who would just be naturally a good fit to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And the thing is like, not every entrepreneur, there are these characteristics, but they might be completely different. They might be driven based on different things, right? Like someone really might have all these characteristics purely because of ego. In some cases, that's okay. It's not like great. It's one of your 7 deadly sins, but that could be the seed that created the plant. And I think it'd be silly to say, hey, they must be, this gender and this race and come from this school or this class of schools, or they must have come from Google beforehand. Like there's none of that. There's just so much differences in uniqueness. And you can find someone who is, maybe we'll just use the word continuous learner. You can find a person who's a continuous learner coming from so many different walks of life, so many different backgrounds, so many different drivers of why they're a continuous learner as well. And so there is just so much, there's so much diversity in this world because of it.
So I do have a follow-up question on this, Will, is once you get past the person, obviously you're looking at the idea, the financials, but a question I have for you is, with your technical background, how much are you looking under the hood at the technology, how it works? You know, obviously what problem is solving, how well is solving that problem, to then be able to convince companies that they need this product?
Yeah. So I would say that there are a lot of different ways of trying to check this box around, hey, this is the right product. And I feel like every firm probably, there's a lot of similarities, but also differences. So I'll just talk about ForgePoint, and hopefully that gives you a sense of what each firm should or is doing. Because we're sector focused, we have a lot of different skills around the table. And one of those skills around the table is we have two people who come at this from different perspectives. One person was CIO for multiple companies. He had multiple CISOs reporting up to him. And so he sort of like understands the pain of both, you know, why they did a security project and then the pain of deploying it and using it. And then we also have someone who has done multiple legal forensics cases. So like this is when like crap hit the fan. And and they're like, okay, this is what really matters at the end of the day. Like this is what gets you, this is what gets you in trouble, that kind of thing. And so like when you think of like nice to haves and must haves, the stuff that gets you in trouble is usually a must have, right? You usually want to avoid getting in trouble. So so those are two of the secret weapons at ForgePoint, but we also have like do the traditional stuff like customer reference calls. We have like, for instance, one of our technical CTOs from another company meet, this new perspective company. There's a lot of different ways of looking under the hood and making sure it's the right solution. Pen testing, source code scanning. I mean, there are just, in some ways, there are too many ways of evaluating, of looking under the hood. And because of our practitioner background, because we've sold a bunch of companies, we've deployed a bunch, we sort of do the things that that you just have to do to make sure that you're looking under the hood in the places that are important. But at the end of the day, one full reality of due diligence is you're never going to do diligence everything. It's just impossible. 80-20 rule.
Say I have a great idea for a next gen solution. Let's just say DLP. And I'm looking for investors to help me build out that tech because I don't know how to code it. But, conceptually, I have designed the best DLP to hit the market. Hypothetically, where would be the best place for me to start? Would it be, simply documenting the concept and then emailing that to angel investors, or independently just seeking out different types of financial assistance programs? And then also, what should I come prepared with if I'm able to get that face-to-face meeting with an investor in order to properly pitch my idea?
Yeah. So I think there's like multiple paths you can go, but I generally summarize it down to two paths usually, even though there's multiple. One path is just going straight to starting to sell the idea to customers. And in some cases, maybe it's such a tough problem and the customer is so convinced that nothing on the market solves that problem that they're willing to say, hey, I trust you, this team, to be a pilot customer. And I'll give you $50K. And you use that $50K to start building a product, blah, blah, blah. And then you keep building on top of it. And another but similar path is, is finding friends and family who can code and who will just help you build stuff. So, but that is a very scrappy, bootstrappy route, right? Which is like, I don't need money. I don't need venture capital. I don't need funding. I'm just going to go prove stuff out. I'm going to go talk to people that matter, customers, that kind of thing. And from there, you can actually go into the fundraising route, which is like, hey, look, I have like 5 customers who are just like ready to be pilot customers. They have budget. All they want is for me to raise some money beforehand so that they know that something's going to get built, and this team is going to get some help. So, would you fund me so I can incorporate this company, hire engineers, start building this, sell these 5 customers? Boom, perfect, great. Investors love that, right? Because it's customers. You have direct visibility to revenue. All right, so that's one path, revenue and customer oriented. Second path is purely selling the team, which is like the background of the team, the experience of the team. They're basically what you're selling to the investors is, hey, you give me $5, I'm going to make you $500, right? That kind of thing. Those investors are going to have their own criteria in terms of whether they believe this team or this entrepreneur is able to make them.
So when you evaluate the individual or the team, are you focusing more on, their experience in that specific field versus a team that just conceptualized an idea that may be more niche, although their expertise in that area may not exist?
Between the two, I prefer the former, which is they know the space, they know the customers, they know the white spaces. I prefer the former. But this actually goes back to a previous question that you asked, which is about team. And and the point I made there as well is like the idea is the idea, right? Like it's worth something, but execution, that is a whole nother thing entirely. And when it's a pitch and when the investment is purely based off of the team, a lot of the times that team has prior startup experience. Whether they were like head of sales or head of product or head of engineering at a startup that was, something like that. Whether the ups end is they were a hugely successful entrepreneur and, they want to start their next business and they don't know what space they're in, or they know high level what they want to do, but not fully. Investors will fund that person all day long, right? It's like, hey, I'm going to give you $5. I know you're going to, you're going to put your time to good use. And I know you're going to put the funding to good use as well. Here's funding. Yeah. Do your thing, that kind of thing. And so the team pitch is definitely one where the resume comes into play, and it comes into, how much entrepreneurial experience did they have before and what roles did they do, right? Like, let's say the person was head of HR at a startup, like that person they didn't sell to customers. They didn't build any product, right? Like that person's not going to automatically, even if that person was head of HR at like, let's say one of the most public security company, that person's not going to automatically get funding because like they never built, they never sold. I mean, their role was very specifically focused on helping the company scale and hire and all these other things, which are incredibly valuable skills. In the very, 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 very early days, it's all about selling. It's all about customers. And so that's why the first path I mentioned is a direct representative of that, right? Like, who cares what your background is? If you have 5 customers willing to become customers tomorrow, the second there's funding, the second the product does X, Y, Z, right? Like, in that case, no one's looking at the background. They're just purely looking at the results that have been generated by that team. And then there's the mixing of the two, right? Great team, great background, great results, execution, sales.
So we talked a lot about startups and starting a company and getting investments. The next question I have for you is exit strategy. So for you and obviously ForgePoint and your investors, what does a successful exit strategy look like?
So there is the high flying approach, there is the low and slow approach, and then a mix between the two. So the high flying approach is where one company literally makes or breaks success, right? Like, and that happens so much, right? Like where one company, the way the phrase is returns the fund. And so like, let's say you invest $300 million and one company returns $300 million all by itself, that kind of thing. That's like a huge success. And in some cases, that one company returns the fund multiple times over. Like you have a $300 million fund, one company returns $900 million. And there are examples, like for instance, some examples where investors will say, oh, I invested $20 million and it became $20 billion. And like, yeah, that's venture, right? That's the craziness of venture, right? And that happens, maybe not the 20 million to 20 billion that often, but a company returning the fund one times over, maybe multiple times over, happens a lot. And that's actually probably the most consistent way of generating returns. So when think about it from that mindset, that means you're investing in companies that are like, they're all going to fly very close to the sun, and some of them are going to make it. Some of them are going to crash and burn, right? And then the other one is the low and slow approach, which also works really well. It's just not as common, but it works really well. And the holy grail is actually when you do both, right? And so I'll talk about both later. But the low and slow approach is like, hey, you invest in 10 companies out of $300 million, and all 10 of them do decent. Like they all make 2x, 3x, 4x, that kind of thing. Well, if they all make 2, 3, 4x, then you've returned the fund 2, 3 times, 4 times over, right? So like that works really well as well. And it's less flashy, less buzz, but you're still generating you're still making money for your investors. And the holy grail is doing both, right? Like you have 2 companies that return the fund and everything else is doing pretty well. And so like, not only do those 2 companies return, each make you like a fund or whatever, but the remaining companies also do it. And so like you've returned the fund 3, 4, 5 times over, maybe even 10 times over. It's just everything's crushing it and that kind of thing. That's a holy grail scenario. That doesn't happen very often, but whenever it does, we definitely remember it and talk about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, hopefully not too many flying to the sun.
Yeah, hopefully not too many. It happens. That's just venture, right? Because like the other thing to think about, so many entrepreneurs are first-time entrepreneurs. Right? Because let's say they crush it, right? Like let's say they become billionaires. Are they really going to be starting another company after that? Maybe, but they're going to be using their own money, right? Like it's done, right? Like the whole rest of their lives, like they're doing this for fun at some point, right? Like the entrepreneurs that haven't made it to that level yet. Those are the ones who want venture capital because it's funding that helps them to get stuff done. And those are also tend to be the ones who, want help from VC to help them grow their business as well.
There is a lot of consolidation in the IT security space. And then also I'm more on the practitioner side. So Chris and I were talking about this earlier. So I guess a question for you is, when you're helping small companies, what advice do you have for them, smaller companies? What advice do you have for them to reach out to practitioners, CISOs, architects, to try to pitch in their solution when they're trying to compete with some of the larger companies whose name I'm not going to mention, but they're pretty big. Right. They're already receiving, in some cases, millions of dollars from us, and they're barely solving these problems, but we have to work with our CISOs, CIOs, boards to them, bring in one more niche solution to fix this one problem that they're not fixing.
Yeah. I think there is, I'm trying to remove my bias here, right? Obviously, I think startups are the best. Who cares about these incumbents?
Is it because I sometimes, we see these smaller companies. Honestly, I've looked at some solutions and I'm like, man, this is a great idea. They sold me. Now I have to go sell them on this. But is it because I see this from the lens of maybe like larger companies that I work for? Or so maybe that can help you answer the question. Is it, you're marketing to smaller companies that are more eager to sort of fix small problems that they see with their infrastructure?
Yeah. No, I have an answer to the question, and I appreciate it, Gabe. This is a fun one. Because the reality is, the venture capital ecosystem wouldn't exist if startups weren't able to crack this problem, right? Like, then everyone works with the big companies, and the big companies get bigger, and there's never such a thing as a startup, right? So, there is a way to be successful as a startup. And I think there is a wide variety of reasons why people go with the startup. And that's what these startups should be pitching. And that's what they are pitching, right? So one pitch is, hey, I am super freaking affordable compared to the incumbents, right? Like, I'm making a very small dent to your budget. And on top of that, if I end up being awesome for you, you're locking in a phenomenally great price as well. And so you hear examples of huge people like locking in VMware at like $300K when they should be paying like $30 million, right? Like, because they jumped in super, super, super early. So there is a budget reason to do it. Another reason is it's a really pressing problem and the incumbent actually doesn't solve the problem at all, right? And so that's just purely a need thing. And sometimes a startup can get really lucky and find those needs that's a white space and really solve it. Another one is also related to sort of the platform versus point solution, right? Like the issue sometimes with the platform is that they're just constantly trying to upsell you, trying to sell you more and more and more and more, lock you in for multiple years, and you don't really need all of it, right? Like, but they just, because they are the leader, they just say, sucks for you. If you want, this one feature in this next level, you have to buy this whole next level, even that has 10 features, because, that's just the position I am in as a bigger company. And so sometimes, people will go for a startup to get that one feature because it's easier and cheaper and faster. And then architecture is another common big reason to do replacements as well. Some solutions are architected for the on-prem world, for the, installed on endpoint world. The best they can get to is like you deploy on a VM, that kind of thing, but they're never going to get to multi-tenant. They're never going to be, deployable on, via Kubernetes or something like that. And so there's a lot of ways to like make it a win-win between the practitioner and the startup. But just knowing all those nuances, that's the special stuff. That's the secret sauce. Like when I talk about execution, like that is an example of that, right? Of being scrappy, or being like, okay, I get it. All right, you have this huge thing. You only want this one problem solved. I know you could do this. I know you could do that. Okay, why don't we do this, right? Like, you're gonna do a renewal in a year. Why don't we do a 6-month contract for now, right? All these creative things that you can do to, just get your foot in the door, prove your value. And then as startup builds and matures and provides more and more features and functionality, the customer is like more than happy to go along for the ride.
That's great. I guess another advantage of getting in early on as a customer on a startup is you can also help shape the product and help make sure it continues to fix the problem that you saw to begin with. I know phishing is something we deal with very often. Identity and access management is another one, and there's constantly new things, new threats, new vectors. So helping the company is another factor as well, right?
Right. And you made a really good point. In some cases, there are some smaller companies that they just don't get any attention, right, from the big vendors. And so they have to work with a startup to get any attention to be able to shape the roadmap.
All right. Well, I'm going to throw you a curveball, man.
Sure.
When you talk about focus areas for aspiring entrepreneurs and solution developers, is there a gap that you find or an area of need that doesn't have an optimal player in it right now? Like, is there an area within cybersecurity that you think to yourself, wow, I wish someone would come to me with a solution for this problem? Does that make sense? Because I'm getting ready to write it down and I'm going to make it for you.
You're hilarious. You're hilarious. This question has never been harder to answer, I would say. Right? I mean, it sort of reminds me of like when you want to get a PhD and you're like, hey, I want to write a paper about a topic that no one else has written about, and it's impossible. But then eventually, you get to the point where you're like, you're a pro. Like, you know exactly what people are working on and what people aren't working on, and where there's room for you to keep pushing the envelope, right?
Yeah.
And so us as VCs, we should, be able to see where there's that envelope that can get pushed. But it's also a tough question because I don't want other VCs to be like making my investments. What the heck? I'm spending all this time developing all these theses.
But is it even like up? And it may not be a fair question because maybe it's not up to the VC. Maybe the VC's role in this is to listen for the technology to present itself versus you to be able to identify it.
Yeah. Yeah. You make a very good point because at the end of the day, we're not actually building these businesses. We're investing in businesses that exist, and they only exist because some people or someone, willed it into existence, that kind of thing, quit their job or whatever. So yes, so we are just, in some ways we are being reactive to what entrepreneurs are doing. And the best thing we can do is to be proactive in finding them before other people do. Before other VCs do. And that's part of the competitive advantage, right? It's like, hey, we understand the space so well. We know what the problems are. And we build a conviction faster than anyone else.
I like what you said, though, in terms of knowing the market.
Yeah.
So you're not actually trying to build a product, but you know the market well enough to understand value that's presented to you.
Right. Exactly. And sometimes, you have all these ideas in your head. And then you meet entrepreneurs like, oh my God, like you actually have the same, what? Finally
develop this idea.
Yeah, finally. Yeah. I mean, how did this happen and all this? And those are really special situations as well. But in those cases, it's like sort of like, it's very obvious both sides should be working together. So this is a really tough one. I'll give you a macro answer, and then just in terms of the space, I feel like there isn't enough going on. I feel like perpetually there's a reason why I'm investing a lot in data security, because I do feel like as a whole macro space, there's still more to go. Like I think privacy stole a lot of the spotlight from data security. And privacy is still developing as a whole space. And so, in fact, I feel like we're going to see privacy companies become data security companies, right? Because data security is where it's at. Like that is the problem that needs to be solved, and that's continuously needs to be solved. So anyways, I think that is a macro one. I think there's still more room to go. I think another one that I'm starting to feel like there's room to go is around identity. There are a lot of obviously there are a ton of companies in identity, tons and tons. But I'm still trying to figure out how to verbalize it. But I think it just mainly comes from the different identity silos that are being created everywhere, and the configuration that's required per identity silo. And then the classic users and groups idea, I just don't know if that's going to continue working as well in the future as it used to with the AD, kind of world. And so, I also feel like Windows is making some changes in terms of how they view identity in terms of their worldview. And I think, there's just such a behemoth in this space. So I do think that there would be value in closely tracking how Microsoft views the future of identity and reacting to that in a way that supports that view as people evolve and shape and change. And I think the traditional, it's just so messy. The users and groups idea, just super, and it just doesn't work. Like recertifying every year, like it just, I don't think it's sustainable. If I was a entrepreneur, that starting a seed stage, like angel stage company, I'd probably spend time in those too, because it's going to be like 3 to 4 years before what that company is building today really becomes a product that people can see and touch and use in their hands, right? Like the more, early adopters, like the early adopters are not jumping in year 1, they're jumping in year 4, 5, or 6.
Yeah. Right? And that's what makes it so challenging is that, it could be completely different in 3 to 4 years from now.
That's right. Right. And so in some ways, like you're like prepping for something 4 years from now, and you could be so completely freaking off. Right. But then the flip side is you can be exactly right as well. One thing I will say though, is you don't have to be like 3 to 4 years ahead of every trend. Like it is possible to catch up. Like it is possible to even catch up after the trend's already like more obvious, right? Like, I think a good example that, almost everyone's seen is like the social media idea, right? Like MySpace was there way before Facebook, like Facebook came in way after and then they just took over, right? Like there is value that you can jump into a developing market after everyone else and still take over it. It just comes down to execution as well. So, if there's a space that you're interested in and it's, everyone's like, barely solving the problem or just thinking about it a lot, it's still possible to jump in brand new and not only catch up, but surpass them. So
that's a good analogy. I like that.
Yeah.
MySpace is a perfect example, or, any social network, and then, Facebook comes in and they take over.
Right. Completely. And, even with Facebook, right, like it didn't stop the creation of Instagram, right, and Twitter and all this other stuff. So number one, there's 2 different criteria to look at. One is we talk about David and Goliath, right? Like if you're David and it's baby Goliath, you're probably going to be okay. You can still beat baby Goliath. And that's probably the MySpace, Facebook part. But then the other one is, if it's a huge market and there's room for like lots of Goliaths and there's only one, then go someplace else. Go have fun, becoming a Goliath in another part of the world, right? Like it's okay, right? I mean, one analogy is like, for instance, US versus rest of the world, right? Like there are some companies that just crush it, like in the rest of the world. I mean, like you think the antivirus, right? Like there are some companies just like said, okay, McAfee, Symantec, whatever, you own the US, I'm going to go everywhere else, right? And they did great.
Or target a specific industry, right, where you could fit better.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Completely.
And it's funny because it comes full circle, because just this week, right, we saw where good old Norton was buying Avast, however you say it, which everybody else in my family has been using for years. It's very popular everywhere except the US. And now, I was reading that. I'm thinking, wait, I remember using Dr. Norton, on my computer back in the day. What happened?
Completely. I mean, there's like, the world is huge. It is like, like, for instance, we have room for, a Google, an Amazon, of, car company, a Tesla, whatever the heck we want to choose in China, right? Like China can have its own version of things, right? Like that could exist in Korea. Like Korea has its own, Amazon owned car companies. Like Japan. I mean, obviously Europe as well. I mean, there's always tons and tons of opportunity, and there's no way that there's ever going to be like one company that's such insanely dominant that there's just no room for anyone else to do anything else. When you consider the fact that the world's so big, and there are so many different CISOs across different verticals. To your point, like a healthcare vertical, you can build an identity company just for healthcare. Is there an endpoint company just for healthcare? I wouldn't be surprised if there was.
There's SIM for healthcare.
SIM for healthcare. There's so much awesome stuff going on. Yeah, so I think a part of our role is just seeing that, right? Because like for some, and I remember my own experience, so I'll pick on myself versus trying to pick on someone else. Like I remember when like the CISO of Lyft was like, I was like, what's the difference between CISO of Lyft and CISO of Bank of America? I need to think this through. Like, do they have different needs? I don't know. Do they? And then eventually there's, they're two completely different freaking
two different industries,
companies, two different industries, different scale, different DNA, different culture, the buy versus build, the complexity. I mean, there's so many differences.
Clients' needs, right?
Needs, right? Like who, like one is prepping for IPO, one has freaking regulators like calling them every single day, right? Like it's a very different scenario. And so being able to sort of like see that, I think is one of the critical things that an entrepreneur needs to do, because then they can be like, okay, I know this space is I'm probably going to like kill myself trying to compete here, but there's this whole another space where I can actually do a really great job. And there's demand, there's need, there's interest. Let's go there, right? And that's something that entrepreneurs has to do, and then that's something, as VCs, we, if we can see that picture as well, I think that would be that's pretty important, pretty useful, finding these white spaces.
How about a cybersecurity bar? Any interest there?
You only serve folks in cybersecurity?
Oh, yeah. Only serve folks in cybersecurity. You have cybersecurity themed drinks. There's you got to break encryption to get through the front door. I have it all planned out. I'll say you my plan. Now,
True to the name, barcode.
Barcode. That's it, man. That's it.
That's right. Yeah. Do it.
I can certainly provide value there.
A pop up during RSA. It's like a speakeasy.
Yes, definitely. It has to be a speakeasy.
Has to be a speakeasy.
It has to be. So we just got back from Vegas. We were out partying while you were in Vegas. What are some of your favorite bars to go to out there?
Oh, I am a big, I'm a big in-person, like someone's house, someone's suite kind of thing. It's just, I have very low alcohol tolerance. And so they're like half a beer and I'm like, I'm a freaking tomato. So
I got you.
And so this year during Black Hat, I was lucky to I just have this Chris Roberts as a friend, and Chris Roberts, he loves, if you know him, whiskey connoisseur. And the reason I say he's lucky is because he brought like 200 bottles of whiskey to a suite that I was hosting, so that we can go hang out with friends.
I didn't get that invite.
Next year. I didn't. Yeah. And so that was an awesome experience, just because like with Chris, I could just be like, I don't know whiskey. I like this and like that. And he's like, boom, here we go. And yeah. I mean, because normally I would just, you look at these menus and you can only look at, for me at least, it's just you look at the price and you're like, okay, clearly this looks good, but I'm not going to pick the most expensive one. I'm just going to pick the medium one. So
location aside, I guess what do you drink? Like, what's your favorite drink?
It really depends. Vegas is very much a party thing, right? And, clubbing, all that. And my clubbing drink is usually vodka something, right? Like vodka plus something else, depending on what I'm feeling. Red Bull, if it's like 2 a.m. And then when I'm trying to do a cocktail or something, it's usually old fashioned. So I do like the bourbons and but it's but I'll be nursing that like the whole night kind of thing. Well, with vodka soda, I don't know, or vodka whatever, I can actually drink the whole thing and feel okay. But it's probably because at the same time I'm running around, and the lights are really low, so people can't see how red I am anyway. So it's probably okay. Yeah. All right. What do you guys drink? Have you guys talked about in your previous episodes?
For me, you call it. For me, it's a vodka tonic or a gin tonic.
All right.
Or club soda, either one.
Yeah, perfect.
I'm straight bourbon. That's normally my go-to.
All right. Good to know. Next RSA / Black Hat. Make sure we got vodka and we got bourbon. Easy peasy.
Definitely. That's it. So, Will, I just heard last call here at the bar. Do you have time for one more?
Sure. Let's do it.
If you opened a cybersecurity theme bar, what would the name be and what would your signature drink be called?
I'd probably go for something that's more like, for some reason, the first word that popped into my head is deception. So I'd probably do something along those themes, right? Like maybe a trick in some kind of way, or deceptive in some kind of way. And so maybe we'll just keep going hardcore and just call it deceit, just like really just go.
It would be like a super strong drink, but tastes very light.
Yeah, so exactly. Oh, that's good.
You pound the drink all night, like, oh man. Yeah. Or maybe every drink is non-alcoholic. You go in and you're thinking, oh man, placebo effect.
I'm getting wasted, and then nope. Oh, actually, maybe we'll do like the, yeah, exactly. You just said it. You just said it, the placebo effect, right? Like, see how many people act wasted even though there's no alcohol in the drinks.
That's a great idea. Deceit with the placebo drink.
Yeah, maybe we don't call it placebo, or maybe we just straight up own it and be like, hey, this is called placebo.
And then you don't know what you get.
You don't know what you're getting. Yeah, exactly.
Just put it in a fancy glass.
I love it.
Oh, man.
Thanks for coming, joining us today, man. Really appreciate it. And again, we'll catch up at RSA or the next conference, wherever that may be. I know Gabe will be with me. So we'll definitely catch up and have a real drink at some point.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks Will. Take care, man.
Hey, Will, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Good seeing you.
Good seeing you as well.
Barcode patrons, if you like this episode and would like to support the podcast, rate us on Apple Podcasts and visit our Patreon site, patreon.com/Barcode Podcast. If you're interested in sponsoring the show, check out the barcodepodcast.com/sponsor. Cheers.
Unfortunately, it's time to shut the bar down for this episode. Thanks for stopping in. See you next time. We'll save you a seat. Be sure to check us out at thebarcodepodcast.com.